This is RadioShack in the year 2000. 7,199 stores. The average company-owned one is 2,300 square feet, smaller than a tennis court, wedged into a strip mall between a nail salon and a sandwich shop. Out of rooms that size comes $4.79 billion of sales and $368 million kept. And on one line of the filing sits $104 million of residual income, which the company describes as carrying a 100% gross margin. 15 years later, bankruptcy court in Delaware. The story everyone tells about why does not contain that line. Stand inside one. Behind the counter is the wall everybody remembers. Hundreds of small drawers, resistors, capacitors, fuses, phone jacks, each labeled by hand. Electronic parts are 24.8% of what these stores sell in 2000. You are also selling 4.1 million mobile phones that year, up 23%. And in August, you put Verizon service into about 4,300 of your own stores. 5,109 of the 7,199 are yours outright. The rest are dealers. Now go forward. February 5th, 2015. RadioShack Corporation and its American subsidiaries file Chapter 11. Petitions in the United States Bankruptcy Court for the District of Delaware, with a debtor-in-possession loan of roughly $285 million arranged the same day. 2 weeks earlier, the New York Stock Exchange had told it that it no longer qualified to be listed. Average market value below $50 million for 30 consecutive trading days, and shareholders' equity below $50 million as well. 14 months earlier, at the close of 2013, the same company had told investors it held a liquidity position of $554.3 million, and the stores were not the part of the estate a federal regulator would end up arguing about. That is the gap, $554.3 million to under $50 million in 14 months. Everyone already has a suspect, and to be fair, the suspect has a case. Between 2011 and 2013, RadioShack's sales fall from $4,032.1 million to $3,434.3 million, a drop of 10.4% in 2013 alone. Those are precisely the years in which ordering a cable, a set of headphones, a phone charger became something you did from the sofa without thinking. And look at what these stores sold. Small, light, standardized, needing no fitting and no advice. Exactly the goods a warehouse and a delivery van take first. 4,297 American stores. Everyone lit, staffed and rented by the month, against a website carrying none of those costs. That is the case against online retail, and you have heard it. Hold on to it, because unlike most explanations for why a company died, this one is testable. RadioShack filed audited accounts for every year of it, so test it. Go to 2010. Here is the part that breaks the case. Amazon had been selling electronics online for years by then. The iPhone was already an ordinary object in an ordinary pocket. And in 2010, RadioShack's revenue rose 4.6% to $4,472.7 million, on comparable store sales up 4.4% at a gross margin of 45.0%. Take those two numbers slowly because they do not fit the story. Comparable store sales is the measure that strips out new openings and closures. It asks one question and answers it honestly. Are the same rooms, open the same length of time, selling more than they sold last year? In 2010, the answer was yes by 4.4%. That is not a chain being hollowed out from the inside. That is a chain growing. Then the margin. In its own risk factors that year, RadioShack described a business that had historically maintained gross margin levels ranging from 45 to 48%. That is not a sentence a retailer under structural attack writes about itself, and it is not a range you will find at a bookseller or a record shop in the same decade. Those businesses had already been ground down by exactly the force we are accusing here. RadioShack had not, nor was it hiding in a corner of the country the internet had not reached. This was a chain with a store in almost every strip mall in America, selling the most commoditized goods in retail, and in 2010 it was still growing on a per-store basis while doing it. So whatever killed it had not started by 2010. And once it did start, it moved at a speed the internet has never moved at. From a 45.0% margin business to a $400.2 million loss inside 3 years. Not a decade of erosion, 3 years. Online retail was in the room the whole time. It was there in 2004, in 2007, in 2010, and through all of it, RadioShack kept posting the numbers of a healthy specialist retailer. Something that has been present for a decade without leaving a mark does not suddenly become the cause of a 3-year collapse. That is an alibi. Not a complete one. The pressure was real, and it was rising, but enough that the obvious suspect cannot have acted alone, and enough that you have to go and look somewhere else. If you want the rest of this case, subscribe. The next witness is the one everybody thinks they already know, because there is a second suspect, and this one is standing next to the drawer wall, holding a soldering iron. Suspect 2. Nobody builds anything anymore. This is the explanation people reach for with real feeling, because it is about them. There was a time when you fixed the television yourself. You bought a fuse, a length of speaker wire, a replacement stylus, a project kit for a child who wanted to know how a radio worked. Then things stopped being fixable, the kits stopped selling, and the drawer wall slowly became a museum exhibit that happened to be for sale. And it is true, it is documented in RadioShack's own filings with numbers. Electronic parts, accessories, and specialty equipment were 32.3% of retail sales in 1996. By 2000, they were 24.8%. Nearly 8 points of the shop gone in 4 years and still sliding. Here is the part that spoils it as a cause of death. That slide had already happened. The year the parts share sat at 24.8% was 2000. And 2000 is also the year RadioShack earned $368 million on a gross margin of 49.4%. The drawer wall was already shrinking as a share of the shop, and the shop was having the best year it would ever have. Look at what had replaced it. In that same year 2000, communications, handsets, home telephones, answering machines, pagers, was already the largest category at 27.9% of retail sales. Audio and video was 22.5%, up from 17.1% the year before. So the drawer wall had not simply shrunk. It had been quietly demoted to third, in a shop that everybody, including its own customers, still called a parts shop. The wall was never load-bearing. It was the reason people walked in. It was not the reason the company made money, and the accounts had been saying so for years before anybody worried. It never entirely died either. 13 years later, at the very end, the non-mobility side of the American stores, every battery, cable, speaker, adapter, and remote control car in them was still selling $1,388.7 million a year, against $3,094.9 million for the segment as a whole. Not a corpse, just the smaller half of the shop. A business does not die of a decline it survived and stayed profitable through for more than a decade, which leaves the suspect people reach for third, and this one has a name and a face. Suspect 3. They were badly run. The case here is strong and it is easy to make. In 2013, sales fell 10.4%. Selling, general and administrative expense, the wages, the rent, the head office in Fort Worth, fell 0.9%. Costs that barely flinched while the top line came away underneath them. The operating loss for 2013 was $344.0 million against $25.0 million the year before, 13 times worse in 12 months. Then add everything you already remember. The rebrand to the Shack, which nobody had asked for, the parade of chief executives through the Fort Worth office, the Super Bowl advertisement in 2014, in which the company made a joke of its own obsolescence, and everybody laughed and nobody went to the shop. Here is the part that limits the charge. The same company with the same stores, run out of the same building in the same city, delivered 4.4% comparable store sales growth in 2010. If the management was the disease, the patient was in excellent health 3 years before dying of it. And when the 2013 filing sets out where the gross margin actually went, it does not name merchandising. It does not name branding or staffing or the advertisement. It names a sales mix shifting towards higher-priced, lower-margin smartphones, an inventory write-off, and heavier promotions. 4.3 percentage points of gross margin, gone in a single year, for reasons that have nothing to do with what the sign above the door said. Notice what that sentence quietly concedes about the business. This was, by 2013, a company in which handsets and the commissions attached to them were approximately 42% of total revenue. Nearly half the business was phones, and the accountants who wrote that filing had to explain the year's collapse in terms of phone economics, because that is where the money was. Bad management makes a bad year worse. That is all it does. On its own, It does not turn a $25.0 million operating loss into a $344.0 million one in 12 months. So, not the internet, at least not alone. Not the drawer wall. Not, by itself, the people in charge. Which means the answer is in the part of the accounts nobody reads. Go and find the footnote. It is in the 2013 annual report, underneath a table, in the small print that exists only because the Securities and Exchange Commission requires it. One sentence. The aggregate amounts of upfront commission revenue and residual income received from wireless service providers were $851.1 million, $1,029.6 million, and $1,233.1 million for 2013, 2012, and 2011, respectively. Read it backwards, which is the order it happened in. $1,233.1 million in 2011. $1,029.6 million in 2012, $851.1 million in 2013, $382.0 million, gone, in 2 years. Now understand what that line actually is, because it is not a product. Nobody manufactures it, nobody ships it, warehouses it, insures it, marks it down after Christmas, or writes it off when it will not sell. There is no shelf it sits on, and no lorry it arrives in. It is money paid to RadioShack by AT&T, by Sprint, by Verizon, for the single act of signing a customer up. Some of it up front, when the contract is activated at the till. Some of it dripping in monthly, for as long as that customer keeps paying their bill. And its older, smaller half is documented outright. In 2000, residual income alone was $104.0 million. The line from the very first minute of this, earned on roughly 6.1 million subscribers who had walked into a RadioShack at some point and signed something. The filing describes residual income as a 100% gross margin line. Every dollar of it, straight through to profit, which tells you what you were actually running. You were not running an electronics chain that also sold phones. You were running a phone carrier's commission desk that also sold electronics in 4,297 rented rooms. And that is a completely different business with a completely different weakness. A retailer whose merchandise sales fall has one move available to it, and every retailer on earth knows what it is. Stop buying merchandise. Order less. Discount what is left. Shrink the range, cut the reorder, and the cost falls away with the revenue. It hurts, it is survivable, and it is what a shop is for. RadioShack never bought this line from anybody. The carriers paid it. So when it fell, there was nothing to stop buying. No supplier to renegotiate with. No purchase order to cancel. No warehouse to run down. Nothing on the cost side moved at all, because there had never been anything on the cost side to move. There is a second weakness in it too, and it is the one that decides the case. A merchandise business has thousands of customers. This line had 3. AT&T, Sprint, and Verizon. The company names them in its own filings as its 3 largest wireless service providers. 3 counterparties, setting the terms, changing their credit rules and their upgrade policies whenever it suited them, in rooms RadioShack was not invited into. Hold 2 numbers side by side, and mind that they sit on different bases. Inside the American store segment, that one commission line was $1,233.1 million in 2011. Gross profit for the whole company in 2011, every store, every product, every battery and cable and remote control car in the country, was $1,722.4 million. That is the shape of the thing. Now watch it break. Work it per phone, because that is the altitude at which it actually happened. Postpaid handset units, contract phones, the ones that pay a commission, fell 20% in 2012, then another 23% in 2013. On each of the phones that did still sell, the average cost to RadioShack rose 36% in 2012 and 14.3% in 2013. The average revenue on that same unit rose 19% and then 7%. Read the pairs against each other, because the whole collapse is in 4 numbers. Cost up 36, revenue up 19. Cost up 14.3, revenue up 7. 2 years running, the phone in the customer's hand got more expensive to put there roughly twice as fast as the money RadioShack got for putting it there. That is what the smartphone did to this shop. Not the iPhone taking the customer away. The iPhone costing more to hand over, closer to an insurance agency than to a shop when you look at it this way. The sale happens at the counter, but the money arrives afterwards monthly. From a third party who was never in the room. and a third party who pays you monthly can also take it back, which is the part nobody sees because it lives in the accounting policies at the very back of the document. The commission is conditional. Under the contract, the upfront commission RadioShack was paid for activating a phone is repaid to the carrier if that handset is deactivated from the network inside a specified period. And the filing is unusually plain about why the deactivations were happening. Customers who could not afford to, or chose not to, keep paying the monthly bill on a smartphone they had signed for in a strip mall. Moving that reserve by a tenth was worth about $2.5 million of 2013 revenue. So fewer phones, thinner margin on each of the ones that sold, and money clawed back months later on phones already sold and already counted. There had been an escape route briefly. RadioShack had put its own staff into 1,522 target mobile centers, selling the same contracts inside somebody else's shop, and it walked out of every one of them before the end of March 2013. The route out of the problem ran through more phone selling, and phone selling was the problem. Now watch it come through the accounts in order. Comparable store sales, down 2.2% in 2011. The first year the direction changes. Gross margin, 42.7% in 2011, 38.4% in 2012, 34.1% in 2013. Revenue, from $4,032.1 million in 2011 to $3,434.3 million in 2013. The 2013 operating loss for the whole company is $344.0 million. Inside the American stores segment alone, $382.0 million came off the commission line between 2011 and 2013. Different bases, and worth saying so out loud. But the point survives the difference. The money that walked off that one line was larger than the loss that put the company in front of a bankruptcy judge. Put the good year and the bad year side by side, in the only unit that makes it real. One store, 1 year, 2011. 4,476 American company-operated stores. The carrier commission and residual line, $1,233.1 million. Divide it out, and the average store is collecting $275,492 a year from phone companies. That is before it sells a single battery, a single cable, a single remote control car. It arrives whether or not anybody comes through the door on a wet Tuesday in February 2013. 4,297 stores. The same line, $851.1 million. Per store, $198,068 a year. $275,492 minus $198,068 is $77,424. $77,424 a year per store that used to arrive and no longer did. Now look at the same 2 years from the other side, because this is where it becomes strange. The mobility platform, every phone accessory, every commission, everything in that half of the shop sold $1,935.3 million in 2011 and $1,706.2 million in 2013. A fall, but a modest one, 11.8%. Take the carrier money out of both, and the picture inverts. In 2011, 63.7% of everything the mobility platform brought in was carrier money rather than goods. By 2013, that was 49.9%, which means the part that was actual merchandise, handsets, devices, the physical objects, went from $702.2 million in 2011 to $855.1 million in 2013. It went up. RadioShack was selling more dollars of phone hardware at the end than it had at the start. It was simply being paid less and less for doing it. Set that against what the room still had to carry. Behind the per-store number sits a mobility platform of $1,706.2 million and a retail platform of $1,388.7 million, $3,094.9 million for the segment in 2013. Across those 2 years, the store count came down by only 179. In 2013 alone, selling, general, and administrative expense fell 0.9%. The rooms were still there. The staff were still there. The leases ran to their full term whether the carrier money came or not, and a lease does not care what a wireless service provider decided about upgrade eligibility in another state. That is the difference between a good year and a bad year in this business. Not what the store sold. It sold more phone hardware in the bad year than the good one. Roughly $77,000 a year per store that the carriers had been sending and then were not. By the end of 2013, RadioShack needed money, and it went and got some. December 1, 2013, it borrows $250 million from a group of lenders with Solace Capital Partners acting as agent, alongside Cerberus Business Finance. Read the terms. Interest at the bank's prime rate plus 10.0% or LIBOR plus 11.0%, and never, in any circumstance, less than 11.5%. This is December 2013, with the Federal Reserve holding its own rate on the floor. Look at what it was borrowing against. Cash had gone from $535.7 million at the end of 2012 to $179.8 million a year later. Long-term debt principal at the close of 2013, $626.4 million. And in the small print of those agreements is the clause that finishes the story. They limit the company's ability to dispose of property in connection with store closures. There is a floor written in as well. Below 4,278 American stores, the revolving facility begins demanding additional reserves. Closing your own shops has just become something you need permission for. March 4, 2014, RadioShack announces it will close up to 1,100 stores. It has done the arithmetic and it publishes it. Closing them would add about $83 million of EBITDA a year and release a further $87 million of cash sitting as stock on the shelves of rooms it no longer wanted. It asks the term lenders for consent. They refuse. In late October, it goes back and asks for a smaller number of stores. They refuse again. By December 2, 2014, with the request still unapproved and the Christmas season already running, the company states in writing that those same lenders have by then taken more than $35 million in fees and interest payments on a loan not yet 12 months old. In the same statement, it counts what is riding on the decision. More than 25,000 people working for it. Here's the part that surprises almost everyone. The store closures you remember as RadioShack's failure to act, the slowness, the refusal to admit what its own numbers were saying, were announced, costed, published, and then blocked 3 times by the people who had lent it the money. 65 days after RadioShack last told the market that its lenders would not let it close stores. On February 5, 2015, the petitions were filed in Delaware. What was left of it went to auction. The buyer that emerged, General Wireless, took the brand and related property in 2015 for a reported $26.2 million. The name, the logo, the sign that had hung over strip malls in every state in the country. And then the court came to sort the rest of the estate, and one line of it brought in the Federal Trade Commission. 117 million customer records. Names, postal addresses, email addresses, purchase histories. Collected one at a time at the register by a clerk asking for your zip code while you bought a 9-volt battery, the small daily indignity that 2 generations of Americans complained about and answered anyway. Put up for auction in May 2015. There was a problem with selling it. RadioShack's own privacy policy, in force on the day the petitions were filed, said this: "We will not sell or rent your personally identifiable information to anyone at any time." The Federal Trade Commission's Consumer Protection Bureau wrote to the court. A coalition of state attorneys general did the same. And a company that had spent decades being teased for asking your address at the till discovered, at the end, that the address was the part somebody wanted. The brand was the priced item. The list of names is what brought a federal regulator into a Delaware courtroom. Walk back into the year 2001 last time, and the room looks exactly as it always did. 2,300 square feet. The drawer wall behind the counter, labeled by hand. 5,109 of them across the country. The rent on that room was being paid, in the end, by a company whose name was not on the sign. And when the rooms were finally emptied, the thing worth arguing over was not on the shelves either. It was the list of everyone who had ever walked past them.